Hi. Everyone good? 早安主播，星辰早安。刷完牙躺好了，今天有睡前故事听。嗨，新闭卷嗖，跟大家说个晚安，徐荣晚安 ，Eric 晚安，月月晚安，早水晶刚洗完澡，好的。阿佩晚安，金武蛇盒子晚安，可以边洗边听台，也可以啦，也可以。弟弟桑晚安，多鱼晚安，多鱼谢谢你帮我做的时间轴，我看到了，阿里阿多。又讲晚安，沉默西风晚安，海色晚安，微笑晚安，习惯晚安，嗨，晚安，好吃鸡排晚安。怎么了？为什么等于？小乔晚安。可以啦，可以边洗澡边听啦，我没差。你们开心就好。好想水晶，我昨天不是有开台吗？沈问晚安。我昨天没有开台吗？我昨天不是有开台，才隔没有很久，数个小时。好啦，谢谢你想我。ありがとう。音量都还好吗？有重击，抱歉呢，我管不着。音量都还好吗 ？BGM 还有我的声音。我的床晃动幅度好大。维尼晚安。今天好冷，对啊，我结冻了，数十不见如隔三秋。你们怎么一点时间不见就要如隔几个秋？不要跟我抢，我也好想水晶。桑尼晚安。只会有人说晚安，好久不见。都 OK， 听起来很舒服。よかったよかった。对，大家刷牙了吗？很重要的问题。然后因为好像有一些新盘，大家好，跟大家解释一下为什么昨天唱歌的时候大家要刷一排牙刷。这个故事呢，是阿佩对不对？是你吗？就是好像也是精英教育台的时候，然后我就一直叫大家去睡觉了，然后呢就有小朋友还没有刷牙然后就在聊天室问说有点不想起来刷牙还是怎么样，太冷之类的。我们就围绕着牙刷的话题不停的讨论。是酒杂是不是？好的，所以是阿佩。对，我们就围绕着刷牙的话题不停的讨论。我想起来了，那个交换礼物的酒杂对不对？然后呢到后来我们的阿佩终于在一番讨论之下去刷完牙了。那个时候是酒杂，所以呢水晶都会在直播当中跟大家干杯。我就觉得天哪，阿佩刷完牙了，真是太棒了，让我们敬刷完牙的阿佩。所以我就跟他们说请帮我刷一排就是牙刷的 emoji， 然后让我们干杯的时候换一个词，我们说 brush。 我们说 brush 就代替 cheers 这样子。嗨。对，详情可以去看那个交换礼物，圣诞节交换礼物的酒杂。听到卡打有点痛苦すみません。すみません。好，那今天我们就是尽量使用这个英文的部分。水晶英语教室没有，今天想说今天开的时间比较晚嘛，平常开9点，那因为一些临时的安排，今天开11点钟。我觉得11点钟还要再学习就有点痛苦了，毕竟我们念完故事杂谈完，谁知道我们会聊多久？可能开始的时间是12点。大家还要听讲解，有点太辛苦了。就是我还在那边解释每个单字是什么意思的话，感觉对太累了，不早了。所以我们今天就是念那你们就听就好了，这个剩下什么解析讲解单字我们未来在开比较早的时间的时候，你们如果想听，我再整理给你们听，好不好？今天就是陪伴大家入睡，这是我的主要目的。明天要考科技儿科技术大考加油！ 你一定会考得很好的。因为怎么样，你跟你的室友都有乖乖刷牙。一定可以的。嗨，我相信你一定可以考得很棒。虽然我不知道有好好刷牙跟考儿科技术大考有什么关系，但是我相信你一定可以的。加油，让我们为 Windy 加油。为明天所有要考试的朋友们加油，你们是最棒的，一定满分。每日全肯定，搜。水晶好温柔，好了。就是我觉得考试的人真的很辛苦，努力准备为了得到一个好成绩是一件很值得被鼓励的事情。对，加油，你是最棒的，一定满分。我都忘了，明天是星期几？明天星期五。我想说，怎么又有假日要考试的人啊？明天是星期五，对不起，我过到不知道何年何月，是我不好。Kristal 晚安，老金晚安，海晚安。你还是要读书，海你等一下还要读书，这么晚了，辛苦了，加油。咪恰晚安，今天的水晶也很可爱。废话，我每天都很可爱。我好像只敢跟 V 恰这样子讲话。卡洛斯晚安。海底没有分星期几，对啊，海底没有再给你分星期几的啊。什么意思？V 恰什么意思？你干嘛？哦哟。不可以，就是我只是顺着你的话讲。不可以吗？水晶承认可爱了，我只是想要让 V 恰觉得哈。水晶放弃高冷歌姬的称号了吗？来，我是不是说过很多次，高冷歌姬跟嘴瓢系 VTuber 跟其他各式各样子我很强很砰的形象都是不冲突的，对不对？我可以发酒疯乱讲话，但仍然是一个高冷歌姬啊，可以吧？我只要那首歌有好好发挥，就是高冷歌姬啊，可以吧？虽然我平常能够好好发挥完一首歌的机会不多。不是很常能够好好发挥完一首歌。半首还不错，3/4可以，整首通常就是不太容易，就是中间通常都会出错，或是最后一句没跟到之类的。水晶说的就是道理，太夸张！你看，你们又来了。你们又来了。嘴瓢系高冷歌姬海色水晶 so 就是这样子。That's me， 百变水晶，对啊，就跟百变小樱一样啊，不可以吗？突然断一句歌词，对，你们很熟哎。不愧是喝可爱长大的水晶，每天都很可爱。你们又来了，真是的。到时候水晶开演唱会唱到一半开始啪就神回了，不行啦。可以吗？可以吗？演唱会有这个容错率吗？不可以啦，不可以啦。但是我觉得如果真的有那一天呢，我是说如果真的有那一天，我应该会なんというか我大概率会哭。我是说如果真的有那一天，我大概率会哭，然后我就会把麦克风给你们。你们帮我唱完。不这样不习惯。好，你们 OK 我就 OK。不是水晶没发挥好，是 background music 不好听。你看你们又来了。 你们就是那种就是小孩子跌倒了，然后那个阿公阿嬷会开始打地板说啊，都是地板歪歪啦，是地板斜斜的，是地板不好。水精灵会越来越强，但我们也会包容水晶的所有一切。我每次都会被你们的真诚而温暖的发言吓到，我要深呼吸来缓解这一切。虽然我觉得历经了2个多月，我早该习惯许荣这样子真诚而温暖的发言，但每次看到还是会吓一跳，就是太闪亮了，我被照射到好刺眼的光芒这样子。虽然我觉得2个月过去我早该习惯了，但果然真诚是人的武器。有点太耀眼了。马不西马不西ありがとう。我一直都不知道原来这边这么油嘴滑舌。有人说你们油嘴滑舌怎么办？有人说你们油嘴滑舌。被你们宠坏。对啊，明明水晶才是照耀我们的存在。好了，我觉得这一切应该停止了。深呼吸，打住，让我们进入今天的正题。我觉得这一切应该就是打住在这边，不然会一发不可收拾。我等一下会哭，这样就不好了。万一我哭就不好了。对。身边朋友都是疯子，夸不了一点，怎么会呢？疯子也可以夸啊，疯子你应该要夸奖疯子啊，疯子活在这世界上多不容易啊，越疯的人越清醒，这个世界是一个大染缸，疯着的那些人才最应该被夸赞啊。我也是疯子啊，你不夸我了吗？对不对？我也是疯子啊，你还是夸我了。因为被粉丝夸而哭的主播。对啊。好的，今天依照我们的往例，我们念的呢都是一些英文的经典名著，要么你知道它的存在，但你未曾读过，要么你小时候被逼着读过而你不喜欢，哈哈，或者你都没有接触过，那也没关系，你就当 radio 听也可以。那今天念的是我个人很喜欢的，但可能很多人不喜欢，至少我身边我收到的意见调查，他们都说这个太有点文绉绉，然后喜欢的人很喜欢，不喜欢的人很不喜欢。我在说什么？就跟哈密瓜一样。就是我就特别喜欢这个情感纠葛文绉绉的感觉，我个人很喜欢。那你不喜欢的话 I don't care。 反正是我选书，我要念 I don't care。 你就当听 radio。夸他们只会用垃圾话回复就算了。垃圾话好吧，如果你的付出没有得到回馈，那确实就不是应该继续进行下去。我支持你，无论你想怎么对待你身边的人。像文绉绉因为晚安。因为太油嘴滑舌，所以要刷牙，超好笑。今天的睡前故事是什么呢？今天的睡前故事是我自己很喜欢的Pride and Prejudice。 你看我一样念书名，我就嘴瓢。Pride and What's wrong with me? Prejudice. Pride and Prejudice。 我个人很爱，但我知道不喜欢的人非常不喜欢，会觉得太不知道在写什么东西这样子。你夸奖你身边的同学，他们全都否定啊？他们是否定你的夸奖，还是否定他们自己，还是他们否定你？为什么要否定呢？可以欣然的接受啊。大家面对夸奖的时候都怎么回应啊？水晶以前也是很不知道怎么面对别人的夸奖，我就会没有啦，一开始会先推脱，然后说没有我没有啦，然后后来想想也不用这样子，我就会说谢谢， 啊，你也是这样。大家会怎么面对别人的夸奖？水晶听到一个最有趣的事，我很喜欢这个，就是比如说啊，女生之间啊，你今天穿得很可爱耶。啊，如果是水晶，我可能会说啊，谢谢，哎，你的发夹也很好看呢，哦，你的外套很帅耶，可能会这样子。我听到最喜欢的是啊，你今天穿得很可爱耶，嘿嘿，很爱，我很爱这个，因为我觉得这个嘿嘿就可以包含很多东西，它可以包含被称赞时的喜悦，以及对你称赞的认可，以及他很敢于在你面前表露自己喜悦的情绪。我觉得这个嘿嘿非常棒。在那之后，水晶以及水晶身边的人，凡被称赞，我们都会说嘿嘿。所以想把这个精神传给大家，欢迎大家之后被称赞的时候也说嘿嘿就可以了。对，会不自在吧，对不对？会哦，你也是否定派，大家都是否定派嘛。嘶吼尖叫阴暗的爬行，然后开始大哭说他爱我。我好喜欢这个回答，他一定喜欢我。他一定爱我，他才会这样说。好赞哦。这个我也喜欢，这个我也喜欢。给那些面对称赞感到很不自在的人，你可以嘿，或者是你可以嘶吼尖叫阴暗爬行，然后觉得对方一定也喜欢我。我觉得这样也不错，可以规避掉很多猜忌，对不对？你直接认定他爱我，你们之后的相处一定会很融洽。还有呢，看来这个世界需要多一点称赞呢。那我们现在来进行称赞彼此的动作吧。我觉得你们都很棒，你们都是最棒的，你们都做得很好，一周快要结束了，辛苦了，谢谢你们陪伴我，你们都是温暖的人，加油！不管你在做什么，我都支持你。Brush。哦，天哪，你们太可爱了。对，就是这样。看，水晶爱我，没错。嘿，水晶爱我，对，就是这样，就是这样。太聪明了，你们真是举一反三，孺子可教也，太棒了。你们都超聪明的，都是好学生，你们太棒了。斯巴拉西，乔川晚安。水晶，请不要让我对着荧幕傻笑。你对着荧幕傻笑了吗？真的假的？就算傻笑的你也很可爱。雅伊奈晚安，怎么一进来就突然被夸夸？就算只是踏进来，你也很值得被夸夸。第一次可以说出有人喜欢我，感谢水晶。我不知道其他人怎么想，但是我相信你很值得被喜欢。三米晚安。真的很谢谢水晶，好爱。不客气，我也很谢谢你。我不知道你们怎么想，但我还蛮喜欢这种氛围的。这个互相鼓励的感觉，我觉得还不错，希望大家也喜欢。好的，好的，让我们进入到书本的世界，不然我会无限的夸奖下去。 因为你们每一个都是很值得被夸奖的，所以如果我再不停下来的话，我们就会夸奖彼此2个小时。这个聊天室越来越暖了。だよね。いいね。水晶的呐喊，そうだね。刚刚在按回音的时候，不小心推到音量了，是不是突然很大声？对不起。外面11度，但我觉得好温暖。注意保暖。好的。英文夸奖台，英文全肯定有没有料？ You guys are the best, okay? And I believe that you guys are all doing a great job. No matter what are you doing, where you are, who are you, I believe that you are doing your best, okay? Yes. And I love you all. Okay? Be safe, be warm. And remember that there's a place can完蛋。我中文很会夸，英文要想一下。Remember there's a place can embrace all of you, 100% of yourself, okay? No matter what you're doing, where you are, who are you, and I believe that you are doing your best. Just because of that, I appreciate for your existence. And I wish you the best. 要想一下。要想一下。你冰冷的身体动起来了。建议剪辑每天晚上听一次，美美入睡。哦，水晶变大声，感觉离得更近了。我现在是离得蛮近的，我想说会不会比较有一点悄悄话的感觉？还是你们觉得 too close？ 先不用这么近。想说有一个悄悄话感，感觉比较适合晚上。じゃあ始めようか。要进化成 ASMR 了吗？我没有这样子做的考量，是因为我真的觉得我会因为嘴瓢或者是各种原因不小心噗嗤或者是笑出来，然后没有注意好音量，我会捅爆你们的耳膜。我没有开 ASMR 是因为我真的觉得我不行。那当然还有设备问题，现在用的还是可能没那么适合 ASMR 的设备，但主要还是因为我觉得我会伤害到大家。Anyways, but I can read you books, and I think that is a different kind of ASMR. So, shall we start? 抛弃式耳膜，抛弃式耳膜哪里买？有这东西？哪里买？好，那我喝一口水，我们开始喽。 In case that you guys can't remember so many characters in the book, I have downloaded a picture to help you guys understand all the characters and their relationships. Okay, so our main character, Elizabeth, and Mr. Darcy, which will appear later in the book, and all the other people, they are relative. Lydia, Jane, who was that? Georgina? Okay, anyways, there are so many sisters in this book, and our main character is Elizabeth. She's the middle child, and the oldest one is Jane. Okay, and our another main character is Mr. Darcy, and his friend, Mr. Bingley. Okay, this shall be the main characters' relationships. I'll put it right here, in case you guys can't remember who they are. Okay. Let it cover my face. Move a little. Okay. 这图贵圈真乱。被隔壁台主播折磨久了，已经习惯耳膜爆炸感。这个隔壁台主播是你可以在这里公开说的吗？就是如果你讲出他的名字，我会有什么风险需要承担吗？不然我还蛮好奇的，亚贝。Fortling 晚安，好久不见。耳膜不是会自己长出来吗？不会，不会。好，那我们就配着这个悠扬的 classical music. Okay, let's start. Pride and Prejudice, Chapter 1. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. However, little known the feelings or views of such a man may be on his first entering a neighborhood. This truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered the rightful property of some one or other of their daughters. "My dear Mr. Bennet," said his lady to him one day, "have you heard that Netherfield Park is let at last?" Mr. Bennet replied that he had not. "But it is," returned she, "for Mrs. Long has just been here and she told me all about it." Mr. Bennet made no answer. "Do you not want to know who has taken it?" cried his wife impatiently. "You want to tell me, and I have no objection to hearing it." This was invitation enough. "Why, my dear, you must know. Mrs. Long says that Netherfield is taken by a young man of large fortune from the north of England, that he came down on Monday in a chaise and four to see the place, and was so much delighted with it that he agreed with Mr. Morris immediately that he is to take possession before Michaelmas, and some of his servants are to be in the house by the end of next week." "What is his name?" "Bingley." "Is he married or single?" "Oh, single, my dear, to be sure. A single man of large fortune, 4,000 or 5,000 a year. What a fine thing for our girls." "How so? How can it affect them?" "My dear Mr. Bennet," replied his wife, "how can you be so tiresome? You must know that I am thinking of his marrying one of them." "Is that this design in settling here?" "Design? Nonsense! How can you talk so? But it is very likely that he may fall in love with one of them, and therefore you must visit him as soon as he comes." "I see no occasion for that. You and the girls may go, or you may send them by themselves, which perhaps will be still better, for as you are as handsome as any of them, Mr. Bingley may like you the best of the party. My dear, you flatter me. I certainly have had my share of beauty, but I do not pretend to be anything extraordinary now. When a woman has 5 grown-up daughters, she ought to give her overthinking of her own beauty. In such cases, a woman has not often much beauty to think of. But my dear, you must indeed go and see Mr. Bingley when he comes into the neighborhood. It is more than I'd engage for, I assure you. But consider your daughters. Only think what an establishment it would be for one of them. Sir William and Lady Lucas are determined to go, merely on that account, for, in general, you know, they visit no newcomers. Indeed, you must go, for it will be impossible for us to visit him if you do not. You are over scrupulous, Shirley. I dare say Mr. Bingley will be very glad to see you, and I will send a few lines by you to assure him of my hearty consent to his marrying whichever he chooses of the girls, though I must throw in a good word for my little Lizzie. I desire you will do not such thing. Lizzie is not a bit better than the others, and I'm sure she is not half so handsome as Jane, nor half so good-humoured as Lydia. But you're always giving her the preference. They have none of them much to recommend them, replied he. They are all silly and ignorant like other girls, but Lizzie has something more of quickness than her sisters. Mr. Bennet, how can you abuse your own children in such a way? You take delight in vexing me. You have no compassion for my poor nerves. You mistake me, my dear. I have a high respect for your nerves. They are my old friends. I have heard you mention them with consideration things last 20 years at least. Ah, you do not know what I suffer. But I hope you will get over it. And I live to see many young men of 4,000 a year come into the neighborhood. There will be no use to us if 20 such should come, since you will not visit them. Depend upon it, my dear, that when there are 20, I will visit them all. Mr. Bennet was so odd a mixture of quick parts, sarcastic humor, reserve, and caprice, that the experience of 23 years had been insufficient to make his wife understand his character. Her mind was less difficult to develop. She was a woman of mean understanding, little information, and unconcerned temper. When she was discontented, she fancied herself nervous. The business of her life was to get her daughters married. Its solace was visiting and news. Everyone good? Okay, I shall keep going. Chapter 2. Mr. Bennet was among the earliest of those who waited on Mr. Bingley. He had always intended to visit him, though to the last always assuring his wife that he should not go. Until the evening after the visit was paid, she had no knowledge of it. It was then disclosed in the following manner. Observing his second daughter employed in trimming a hat, he suddenly addressed her with, "I hope Mr. Bingley will like it, Lizzie." "We're not in a way to know what Mr. Bingley likes," said her mother resentfully, "since we are not to visit." "But you forget, Mamma," said Elizabeth, "that we shall meet him at the assembles, and that Mrs. Long promised to introduce him." "I do not believe Mrs. Long will do any such thing. She has 2 nieces of her own. She is a selfish, hypocritical woman. and I have no opinion of her." "No more have I," said Mr. Bennet, "and I'm glad to find that you do not depend on her serving you." Mrs. Bennet deigned not to make any reply, but, unable to contain herself, began scolding one of her daughters. "Don't keep coughing so, Kitty. For heaven's sake, have a little compassion on my nerves. You tear them to pieces." "Kitty has no discretion in her coughs," said her father. "She times them ill." "I do not cough for my own amusement," replied Kitty fretfully. "When is your next ball to be, Lizzie?" "Tomorrow fortnight." "So it is," cried her mother. "And Mrs. Long does not come back till the day before, so it will be impossible for her to introduce him, for she will not know him herself." "Then, my dear, you may have the advantage of your friend, and introduce Mr. Bingley to her." "Impossible, Mr. Bennet, impossible. When I am not acquainted with him myself, how can you be so teasing?" "I honor your circumspection. A fortnight's acquaintances is certainly very little, when one cannot know what a man really is by the end of a fortnight. But if we do not venture, somebody else will. And, after all, Mrs. Long and her daughters must stand their chance. And, therefore, as she will think it an act of kindness if you decline the office, I will take it on myself." The girls stared at their father. Mrs. Bennet said only, "Nonsense, nonsense." "What can be the meaning of that emphatic explanation?" cried he. "Do you consider the forms of introduction and the stress that is laid on them as nonsense? I cannot quite agree with you there. What you say, Mary? For you are a young lady of deep reflection, I know, and read great books and make extracts." Mary wished to say something sensible, but knew not how. While Mary is adjusting her ideas, he continued, "Let us return to Mr. Bingley." "I am sick of Mr. Bingley," cried his wife. "I'm sorry to hear that, but why did you not tell me that before? If I have known as much this morning, I certainly would not have called on him. It is very unlucky, but as I have actually paid the visit, he cannot escape the acquaintance now." The astonishment of the ladies was just what he wished. That of Mrs. Bennet, perhaps surpassing the rest, though, when the first tumult of joy was over, she began to declare that it was what she had expected all the while. "How good it was in you, my dear Mr. Bennet! But I knew I should persuade you at last. I was sure you loved your girls too well to neglect such an acquaintance. Well, how pleased I am, and it is such a good joke, too, that you should have gone this morning and never said a word about it till now." "Now, Kitty, you may cough as much as you choose," said Mr. Bennet, and as he spoke, he left the room, fatigued with the raptures of his wife. "What an excellent father you have, girls," said she, when the door was shut. "I do not know how you will ever make him amends for his kindness, or me either, for that matter. At our time of life, it is not so pleasant, I can tell you, to be making new acquaintances every day. But for your sakes, we would do anything. Lydia, my love, though you are the youngest, I dare say Mr. Bingley will dance with you at the next ball." "Oh," said Lydia stoutly, "I'm not afraid, for though I am the youngest, I'm the tallest." The rest of the evening was spent in conjecturing how he would return Mr. Bennet's visit and determine when they should ask him to dinner. Chapter 3. Not all that Mr. Bennet, however, with the assistance of her 5 daughters, could ask on the subject was sufficient to draw from her husband any satisfactory description of Mr. Bingley. They attacked him in various ways, with barefaced questions, ingenuous suppositions, and distant submissions. Hold on. Let me act myself together. Whew. Okay. But he eluded the skill of them all, and they were at last obliged to accept the second-hand intelligence of their neighbour, Lady Lucas. Her report was highly favourable. Sir William had been delighted with him. He was quite young, wonderfully handsome, extremely agreeable, and, to crown the whole, he meant to be at the next assembly with a large party. Nothing could be more delightful. To be fond of dancing was a certain step towards falling in love, and very lively hopes of Mr. Bingley's heart were entertained. If I can but see one of my daughters happily settled at Netherfield, said Mrs. Bennet to her husband, and all the others equally well married, I shall have nothing to wish for. In a few days, Mr. Bingley returned Mr. Bennet's visit, and sat about 10 minutes with him in his library. He had entered hopes of being admitted to a sight of the young ladies, of whose beauty he had heard much, but he saw only the father. The ladies were somewhat more fortunate, for they had the advantage of ascertaining from an upper window that he wore a blue coat and rode a black horse. An invitation to dinner was soon afterwards dispatched, and already had Mrs. Bennet planned the courses that were to do credit to her housekeeping, when an answer arrived which deferred it all. Mr. Bingley was obliged to be in town the following day, and, consequently, unable to accept the honour of their invitation. Mrs. Bennet was quite disconcerted. She could not imagine what business he could have in town so soon after he arrived in Hertfordshire, sorry. And she began to fear that he might be always flying about from one place to another, and never settle at Netherfield as he ought to be. Lady Lucas quieted her fears a little by starting the idea of his being gone to London only to get a large party for the ball, and a report soon followed that Mr. Bingley was to bring 12 ladies and 7 gentlemen with him to the assembly. The girls grieved over such a number of ladies, but were comforted the day before the ball by hearing that instead of 12 he brought only 6 with him from London, his 5 sisters and a cousin. And when the party entered the assembly room, it consisted of only 5 altogether: Mr. Bingley, his 2 sisters, the husband of the eldest, and another young man. Mr. Bingley was good-looking and gentlemanlike, He had a pleasant countenance and easy, unaffected manners. His sister were fine women, with an air of decided fashion. His brother-in-law, Mr. Hurst, merely looked the gentleman, but his friend, Mr. Darcy, soon drew the attention of the room by his fine, tall person, handsome features, noble mien, and the report which was in general circulation with 5 minutes after his entrance, of his having 10,000 a year. The gentleman pronounced him to be a fine figure of a man. The ladies declared he was much handsomer than Mr. Bingley, and he was looked at with great admiration for about half the evening, till his manners gave a disgust which turned the tide of his popularity, for he was discovered to be proud, to be above his company, and above being pleased, and not all his large estate in Derbyshire could then save him from having a most forbidden, disagreeable countenance and being unworthy to be compared with his friend. I must know. Hold on. What kind of name is that, Derbyshire? 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 Hold on. I must know. I can pronounce it wrong again. Give me a chance. Derbyshire. Oh, Derbyshire. Okay. I won't do it wrong again. Mr. Bingley had soon made himself acquainted with all the principal people in the room. He was lively and unreserved, danced every dance, was angry that the ball closed so early, and talked of giving one himself at Netherfield. Such unable qualities must speak for themselves. What a contrast between him and his friend! Mr. Darcy danced only once with Mrs. Hurst and once with Miss Bingley, declined being introduced to any other lady, and spent the rest of the evening in walking about the room, speaking occasionally to one of his own party. His character was decided. He was the proudest, most disagreeable man in the world, and everybody hoped that he would never come there again. Amongst the most violent against him was Mrs. Bennet, whose dislike of his general behaviour was sharpened into particular resentment by his having slighted one of her daughters. Elizabeth Bennet had been obliged, by the scarcity of gentlemen, to sit down for 2 dances, and during part of that time Mr. Darcy had been standing near enough for her to hear a conversation between him and Mr. Bingley, who came from the dance for a few minutes to press his friend to join it. "Come, Darcy," said he, "I must have you dance. I hate to see you standing about by yourself in this stupid manner. You had much better dance." "I certainly shall not. You know how I detest it, unless I'm particularly acquainted with my partner. At such an assembly as this it would be insupportable. Your sisters are engaged, and there is not another woman in the room whom it would not be a punishment to me to stand up with." "I will not be so fastidious as you are," cried Mr. Bingley. "For a kingdom, upon my honour, I never met with so many pleasant girls in my life as I have this evening, and there are several of them, you see, uncommonly beauty." "You are dancing with the only handsome girl in the room," said Mr. Darcy, looking at the eldest Miss Bennet. "Oh, she's the most beautiful creature I ever beheld. But there's one of her sisters sitting down just behind you, who is very pretty, and I dare say very agreeable. Do let me ask my partner to introduce you." "Which do you mean?" And, turning around, he looked for a moment at Elizabeth, till catching her eye, he withdrew his own and coldly said, "She is tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me. I am in no humor at present to give consequence to young ladies who are slightly by other men. You had better return to your partner and enjoy her smiles, for you are wasting your time with me." Mr. Bingley followed his advice. Mr. Darcy walked off, and Elizabeth remained with no very cordial feelings toward him. She told the story, however, with great spirit among her friends, for she had a lively, playful disposition which delighted in anything ridiculous. The evening altogether passed off pleasantly to the whole family. Mrs. Bennet had seen her eldest daughter much admired by the Netherfield party. Mr. Bingley had danced with her twice, and she had been distinguished by his sisters. Jane was so much gratified by this as her mother could be, though in a quieter way. Elizabeth felt Jane's pleasure. Mary had heard herself mentioned to Miss Bingley as the most accomplished girl in the neighbourhood. And Catherine and Lydia had been fortunate enough never to be without partners, which was all that they had yet learned to care for at a ball. They returned, therefore, in good spirits to Longbourn, the village where they lived, and of which they were the principal inhabitants. They found Mr. Bennet still up, with a book. He was regardless of time, and on the present occasion he had a good deal of curiosity as to the event of an evening which had raised such splendid expectations. He had rather hoped that his wife's views on the stranger would be disappointed, but he soon found out that he had a different story to hear. "Oh, my dear Mr. Bennet," as she entered the room, "we have had a most delightful evening, a most excellent ball. I wish you had been there. Jane was so admired, nothing could be like it. Everybody said how well she looked, and Mr. Bingley thought her quite beautiful and danced with her twice. Only think of that, my dear. He actually danced with her twice. And she was the only creature in the room that he asked a second time. First of all, he asked Mrs. Lucas. I was so vexed to see him stand up with her, but however, he did not admire her at all. Indeed, nobody can, you know, and he seemed quite struck with Jane as she was going down the dance, so he inquired who she was, and got introduced and asked her for the 2 next, then the 2 third, and he danced with Miss King, and the 2 fourth with Maria Lucas, and 2 fifth with Jane again, and the 2 sixth with Lizzie, and the... If he had had any compassion for me," cried her husband impatiently, "he would not have danced half so much. For God's sake, say no more of his partners, or that he had sprained his ankle in the first dance." Oh, my dear, I'm quite delighted with him. He is so excessively handsome, and his sisters are charming women. I never in my life saw anything more elegant than their dresses. I dare say the lace upon Mrs. Hutt's gown—" Here she was interrupted again. Mr. Bennet protested against any description of finery. She was therefore obliged to seek another branch of the subject, and related with much bitterness of spirit and some exaggeration the shocking rudeness of Mr. Darcy. "But I can assure you," she added, "that Lizzie does not lose much by not suiting his fancy, for he is a most disagreeable, horrid man, not at all worth pleasing. So high and so conceited that there was no injuring him. He walked here and he walked there, fancying himself so very great, not handsome enough to dance with. I wish you had been there, my dear, to have given him one of your sit-downs. I quite detest the man." Chapter 4. When Jane and Elizabeth were alone, the former, who had been cautious in her praise of Mr. Bingley before, expressed to her sister just how very much she admired him. "He's just what a young man ought to be," said she. "Sensible, good-humoured, lively, and I never saw such happy manners. So much ease, with such perfect good breeding." "He's also handsome," replied Elizabeth, "which a young man ought likewise to be, if he possibly can. His character is thereby complete." "I was very much flattered by his asking me to dance a second time. I did not expect such a compliment." "Did not you? I did for you. But that is one great difference between us. Compliments always take you by surprise, and me never. What could be more natural than his asking you again? He could not help seeing that you were about 5 times as pretty as every other woman in the room. No thanks to his gallantry for that. Well, he certainly is very agreeable, and I give you leave to like him. You may like many a stupider person." "Dear Lizzie," "Oh, you are a great deal too. You know to like people in general. You never see a fault in anybody. All the world are good and agreeable in your eyes. I never heard you speak ill of a human being in your life." "I would not wish to be hasty in censoring anyone, but I always speak what I think." "I know you do. And it is that which makes the wonder, with your good sense, to be so honestly blind to the follies and nonsense of others. Affectation of candor is common enough. One meets with it everywhere. But to be candid without ostentation or design, to take the good of everybody's character and make it still better and say nothing of the bad, belongs to you alone. And so you like this man's sister too, do you? Their manners are not equal to him." "Certainly not, at first. But they are very pleasing women when you converse with them. Miss Bingley is to live with her brother and keep his house, and I'm much mistaken if we shall not find a very charming neighbour in her." Elizabeth listened in silence, but was not convinced. Their behaviour at the assembly had not been calculated to please in general, and with more quickness of observation and less pliancy of temper than her sister, and with a judgment too accessible that by any attention to herself she was very little disposed to approve them. They were in fact very fine ladies, not deficient in good humour when they were pleased, nor in the power of making themselves agreeable when they choose it, but proud and conceited. They were rather handsome, had been educated in one of the first private seminaries in town, had a fortune of £20,000, were in the habit of spending more than they ought, and of associating with people of rank, and were therefore, in every respect, entitled to think well of themselves, and meanly of others. They were of a respectable family in the north of England, a circumstance more deeply impressed on their memories than their brother's fortune and their own had been acquired by trade. Mr. Bingley inherited property to the amount of nearly £100,000 from his father. Who had intended to purchase an estate but did not live to do it. Mr. Bingley intended it likewise, and sometimes made choice of his county. But as he was now provided with a good house and the liberty of a manor, it was doubtful to many of those who best knew the easiness of his temper, whether he might not spend the remainder of his days at Netherfield and leave the next generation to purchase. 诗音晚安。His sisters were anxious for his having an estate of his own, but though he was now only established as a tenant, Miss Bingley was by no means unwilling to preside at his table, nor was Mrs. Hurst, who had married a man of more fashion than fortune, less disposed to consider his house as her home when it suited her. Mr. Bingley had not been of age 2 years, when he was tempted by an accidental recommendation to look at Netherfield House. He did look at it and into it for half an hour, was pleased with the situation and the principal rooms, satisfied with what the owner said in its praise, and took it immediately. Between him and Darcy, there was a very steady friendship. In spite of great opposition of character, Bingley was endeared to Darcy by the easiness, openness, and ductility of his temper, though no disposition could offer a greater contrast to his own, and though with his own he never appeared dissatisfied. On the strength to Darcy's regard, Bingley had the firmest reliance, and of his judgment the highest opinion. In understanding, Darcy was the superior. Bingley was by no means deficient, but Darcy was clever. He was at the same time haughty, reserved, and fastidious, and his manners, though well-bred, were not inviting. In that respect, his friend had greatly the advantage. Bingley was sure of being liked whenever he appeared. Darcy was continually giving offense. The manner in which they spoke of the Merton Assembly was sufficiently characteristic. Bingley had never met with more pleasant people or prettier girls in his life. Everybody had been most kind and attentive to him. There had been no formality, no stiffness. he had soon felt acquainted with all the room, and, as to Miss Bennet, he could not conceive an angel more beautiful. Darcy, on the other contrary, had seen a collection of people in whom there was little beauty and no fashion, for none of whom he had felt the smallest interest, and from none received either attention or pleasure. Miss Bennet he acknowledged to be pretty, but she smiled too much. Mrs. Hurst and his sister allowed it to be so, but still they admired her and liked her, and pronounced her to be a sweet girl, and one whom they would not object to know more of. Miss Bennet was therefore established as a sweet girl, and their brother felt authorized by such commendation to think of her as he chose. I should probably act myself again. I keep saying things wrong. What's wrong with me? May I take a rest? Thank you. I see you. We enter chapter 5, and this shall be the last chapter for today, since I think 5 chapters is enough. Don't push yourself too hard. Oh, thank you. You guys are always so sweet. Okay, so as we enter chapter 5, this shall be also the last chapter for today. I think maybe we could do it as 5, 5, 5 every time. And if you're interested with the book, you can find it yourself on the internet. It should be widely public, open to be read. And if you're not interested with this kind of book, just wait until the next stream. Okay. Chapter 5. Within a short walk of Longbourn lived a family with whom the Bennets were particularly intimate. Sir William Lucas had been formerly in trade in Meryton, where he had made a tolerable fortune, and risen to the honour of knighthood by an address to the king during his mayoralty. Sorry, probably 30 seconds. Hold on. Okay. Again. The distinction had perhaps been felt too strongly. It had given him a disgust to his business, and to his resistance in a small market town, and in quitting them both, he had removed with his family to a house about a mile from Meryton, denominated from that period Lucas Lodge, where he could think with pleasure of his own importance, and, unshackled by business, occupied himself solely in being civil to all the world. For, though elated by his rank, it did not render him supercilious. Why am I doing this? On the contrary, he was all attention to everybody. By nature, inoffensive, friendly, and obliging. His presentation at What's wrong with me? His presentation at St. James had made him courteous. I want to reread this part again. Hold on. Let me reread this part again. What's wrong with me? Shit. Okay, again. What's wrong with my mouth? Books don't matter, but Kristal matters. Thank you. Okay, again. Within a short walk of Longbourn lived a family with whom the Bennets were particularly intimate. Sir William Lucas had been formerly in trade in Meryton, where he had made a tolerable fortune, and risen to the honour of knighthood by an address to the king during his mayoralty. The distinction had perhaps been felt too strongly. It had given him a disgust to his business and to his resistance in a small market town, and in quitting them both, he had removed his family to a house about a mile from Meryton, denominated from that period Lucas Lodge, where he could think with pleasure of his own importance, and unshackled by business, occupy himself solely in being civil to all the world. For, though elated by his rank, it did not render him supercilious again. On the contrary, he was all attention to everybody, by nature inoffensive, friendly, and obliging. His presentation at St. James had made him courteous. There's always some words that is hard to pronounce. Don't blame yourself. Oh, you guys really need to stop this. You guys really need to stop this, especially you. Being too warm. Lady Lucas was a very good kind of woman, not too clever to be a voluble neighbor to Mrs. Bennet. They had several children, the eldest of them, a sensible, intelligent young woman, about 27, was Elizabeth's intimate friend. That the Miss Lucases and the Miss Bennets should meet to talk over a bowl was absolutely necessary. And the morning after the assembly brought the former to Longbourn to hear and communicate. You begin the evening well, Charlotte, said Mrs. Bennet with civil self-command to Miss Lucas. You were Mr. Bennet's first choice. Yes, but he seemed to like his second better. Oh, you mean Jane? I suppose, because he danced with her twice. To be sure, that did seem as if he admired her. Indeed, I rather believe he did. I heard something about it, but I hardly know what. Something about Mr. Robinson. Perhaps you mean what I overheard between him and Mr. Robinson? Did not I mention it to you? Mr. Robinson's asking him how he liked our Meryton assembles, and whether he did not think there were a great many pretty women in the room, and which he thought the prettiest, and his answering immediately to the last question. Oh, the eldest Miss Bennet, beyond a doubt. There cannot be two opinions on that point. Upon my word, well, that is very decided indeed. That does seem as if. But However, it may all come to nothing, you know. My overhearing were more to the purpose than yours, Eliz, said Charlotte. Mr. Darcy is not so well worth listening to as his friend, is he? Poor Eliza, to be only just tolerable. I beg you will not put it into Liz's head to be vexed by his ill treatment, for he is such a disagreeable man that it would be quite a misfortune to be liked by him. Mrs. Long told me last night that he sat close to her for half an hour without once opening his lips. Are you quite sure, Mama? Are you quite sure, ma'am? Is not there a little mistake? Said Jane. I certainly saw Mr. Darcy speaking to her. Because she asked him at last how he liked Netherfield, and he could not help answering her. But she said he seemed quite angry at being spoken to. Miss Bingley told me, said Jane, that he never speaks much, unless among his intimate acquaintances. With them, he is remarkably agreeable. I do not believe a word of it, my dear. If he had been so very agreeable, he would have talked to Mrs. Long, but I can guess how it was. Everybody says that he is eat up with pride, and I dare say he had heard somehow that Mrs. Long does not keep a carriage, and had come to the ball in a hack chaise. I do not mind his not talking to Mrs. Long, said Miss Lucas, but I wish he had danced with Eliza. Another time, Lizzie, said her mother. I would not dance with him if I were you. I believe, ma'am, I may safely promise you never to dance with him. His pride, said Miss Lucas, does not offend me so much as pride often does, because there is an excuse for it. One cannot wonder that so very fine a young man with family, fortune, everything in his favor, should think highly of himself. If I may so express it, he has a right to be proud. That is very true, replied Elizabeth, and I could easily forgive his pride if he had not mortified mine. Pride, observed Mary, who piqued herself upon the solidity of her reflections, is a very common failing, I believe, by all that I have ever read. I am convinced that it is very common indeed that human nature is particularly prone to it, and that there are very few of us who do not cherish a feeling of complacency on the score of some quality or other, real or imaginary. Vanity and pride are different things, though the words are often used synonymously. 看超久. A person may be proud without being vain. Pride relates more to our opinion of ourselves, vanity to what we would have others think of us. If I were as rich as Mr. Darcy, cried a young Lucas, who came with his sister, I should not care how proud I was. I would keep a pack of foxhounds and drink a bottle of wine a day. Then you would drink a great deal more than you ought, said Mrs. Bennet. And if I were to see you at it, I should take away your bottle directly. The boy protested that she should not. She continued to declare that she would, and The argument ended only with the visit. 心月晚安。I think we should call it a day here. What's wrong with my mouth? Gosh. Maybe it's because I can't see too clearly or something. Sorry, I should stop making excuse. I should prepare it better. But before I make more further mistake, I think we should end it right here today. 书名的翻译很有趣 Pride 它翻译成傲慢，而不是原本的自豪，感觉更贴近原文剧情。Mr. Darcy 在最一开始被大家描绘成是一个最傲慢、难以接近、目中无人的一个人。虽然他有非常绝美的外表，但当大家发现他一点都不好亲近的时候，就开始在背后说他是一个多么自豪一个多么傲慢而目中无人的人。与之相对的 Mr. Bingley 就是多么平易近人的一个人。天哪，我连中文都不会讲，多么平静，多么平易近人的一个人。前5章呢，就是在讲Bennet family 有5个女孩，大姐呢是 Jane， 她是 the prettiest 最漂亮的，所以她也很快吸引了 Mr. Bingley 的注意。他们2个呢也很快顺利的开始相处在一起。 And our main character 她是 the second one Elizabeth， 很聪明也很灵光，但是没有她姐姐那么漂亮。那在舞会当中呢 Mr. Darcy 他不愿意跟任何他不认识的人跳舞，而 Mr. Bingley 就跟他说，你应该去跟 Elizabeth 跳舞。 Elizabeth 是 Jane 的妹妹，而她也很漂亮。但是 Mr. Darcy 他是一个很傲慢的人，他看了一眼 Elizabeth 就说，是蛮漂亮的，但没有漂亮到可以跟我一起跳舞。一个很烦的回答。而 Elizabeth 她知道这件事情，她听到了，她知道了 Mr. Darcy 是多么傲慢的一个人，她对他也没有任何一点的好感。但在那之后越来越多次的相处当中， Mr. Darcy 渐渐发现 Elizabeth 是多么真挚、率真、聪明、有主见的一个女生， which 让他非常的被吸引。而 Elizabeth 也会在后面跟 Mr. Darcy 的相处当中慢慢发现他其实并不是那么傲慢的一个人。所以书本叫《傲慢与偏见》，其实是他们2个人对彼此的看法阻挡了他们原本或许应该顺利的爱情。因为 Mr. Darcy 的傲慢还有 Elizabeth 对他的偏见，导致他们绕了好长的一段路才认清彼此其实喜欢彼此。而这中间有趣的过程就是看偏见如何被解开，傲慢如何被放下。外表光鲜亮丽，内心乱七八糟，你在说我吗？布鲁里晚安。我自己很喜欢这本书，是因为首先我喜欢看爱情故事，其次我喜欢看原本高高在上的人被往下拉的感觉。我喜欢看原本高高在上的 Mr. Darcy 为了能够跟 Elizabeth 在一起而放下很多事情，然后用他所能做到的所有方式去向 Elizabeth 澄清自己是一个怎么样的人。而 Elizabeth 在这个过程当中，她一直都是很聪明很看透世间的那个，但她却一直被一个偏见给蒙蔽，没有办法看到真正的 Mr. Darcy。 她在这个过程里面也会透过自己的努力逐渐摸清楚事情的真相。 就是这样漫长的过程。我喜欢看这种很纠葛的爱情。水晶也很有趣，很善良。不用这么紧张，我只是在调侃。不是8点档，是复仇爽文。8点档嘛，其实我觉得有一点，就是它的呈现方式是那么的文艺，但它的剧情其实也蛮8点档的。毕竟有5个姐妹嘛，她们每一个人一定都会发展自己的故事。其实 Jane 跟 Mr. Bingley 的故事算是顺利，当然中间也有阻碍，但算是顺利。她的妹妹们就比较经历比较精彩一点。那感情线的部分呢，就是 Elizabeth 跟 Mr. Darcy 互相在纠葛拉扯 which is the best part。 你没有爱情的拉扯都是直接断掉。不要拉，不要断掉。红线怎么说？断掉是因为不适合啦。对啊，老天帮你自己斩断不适合的情缘啊，对不对？就是为了等最适合的那个到来的时候，可以拉扯拉住打结。断掉就是因为这个不适合啦，先帮你弄掉，对不对？伟哥晚安。哇，你来的真不是时候，我们差不多要结束了。因为正缘还没到，そうだよ。Hope so。 OK， 知道这个时候我们应该做什么吗？ I believe the right one will come into your life, okay? You deserve the best one, and if he or she hasn't showed up, maybe it's because they haven't born yet. All the mistakes has been taken is because the God wants you to prepare yourself before you met the real one, okay? Don't be frustrated. Don't be frustrated, okay? You will meet the right one in the right time at the right place. I believe in you, and before that, you live your life. Okay? Yes, maybe it's because they haven't born yet. Who knows? Yeah, if you haven't met your right one, maybe it's because he or she just not in this world right now yet. Who knows? 可能就还没出生啊，谁知道？你还没遇到，可能就是他还没出现在这个世界上啊，所以你没遇到很正常啊。为什么有警察啊？等一下。嗨，请大家不要气馁，不要灰心。I hope so 。那些可能在你的生命当中带给你伤害的，或者是让你觉得平白付出的，绝对都不是没有回馈。你会从中学到很多，学到怎么跟别人相处，你就会用一个最棒的姿态去面对将来你要遇到的那个最对的人。就像写题目，你一定也是前面会错一些，到最后一场考试的时候，你的错误率就会变低嘛。一样的，前面那些带给你伤害的让你难过的你觉得进行得很不顺遂的，一定都是为了让你学习怎么更好的跟人相处。 这样你遇到那个最正确、最对的人的时候，你们就会好好的持续下去。我是这么觉得的。你已经在幼儿园找我老婆了，就他妈的。很喜欢一句话，送给各位单身的朋友：当一个人就够完美的时候，为什么需要另一半 ？Well， 我之前看，应该是某个 Reels 的时候，有看到有一个美国很有名的女脱口秀演员，她就说，大家都说，当你把自己的生活过得最好的时候，就是你准备好谈恋爱的时候。但是她并不认同这个说法，她觉得，当我把自己过得很好的时候，我为什么要 I can come home to myself 我就回家找我自己就好了，如果我过得这么好。她的意思其实是，当你真的过得很好的时候，你不会有那么强烈的渴求你需要另外一个人来支撑你。所以我觉得你各位现在如果觉得自己的生活就跟精神状态其实是良好的，那表示你们在过一个很棒的生活，就是你现在是很赞的意思。或许没有另外一个吸引你的人到你的生命当中，是因为你已经够饱满了。我是这样觉得的。当你已经够饱满的时候，你自己可以满足你自己。或许你看待伴侣的眼光会变得更高，或许你会觉得没有那么渴求，而没有那么渴求也就不会让你冲动而去做错误的决定。一切都是最好的安排。豆干晚安。每个人都可以到达完美，每个人都是完美的。森林里最赞的哥布林。对不起，这个有点好笑。要当就当森林里最赞的哥布林。哥布林一起强大。狗妹，我忍不住。黄金哥布林。你只有身材是饱满的，身材是饱满的多好啊！那表示你，对不对？吃好、喝好、睡好、健康都好。身材不饱满听起来就是 like maybe too thin or not healthy enough。好赞的精神状态！哇塞，森林里最赞哥布林哎！要当就当最炙热的哥布林，烫手山芋黄金哥布林。好像在卖东西哦，好像小时候那种卡车，然后不是卡车啊，货车，反正就是那种车上有卖就是食物，可能我不知道臭豆腐还是什么之类的，然后那个车开过去会有喇叭，臭豆腐好吃，臭豆腐，然后在沿路广播的那种。烫手山芋最炙热的黄金哥布林，走过路过千万不要错过，进来看看，欢迎光临。结果只是变哥布林大法师，不是啦，我不是这个意思。听完水晶直播要回山洞，就他妈的，我根本就不是这个意思，超好笑。一不小心从超感性变超搞笑。不错啊，我觉得搞笑比较符合我们的痛调。刚刚那一段很感性的发言讲完，都觉得天哪，我等下怎么收尾啊？祝大家就是我不知道单身快乐吗？还是怎么样啊？完蛋圆不回来，谢谢你帮我搞笑。感谢你。山洞里网络不好，出来看直播好，谢谢。嗨，祝大家有美满的个人生活。有美满的个人生活之余，如果你遇到了一个让你想要从个人生活变成两人生活的人， 我也祝福你有美满的两人生活。May the force be with you. Yes. 每日情绪调动。今天念的不是很好，希望大家见谅。可能 I'm not sure the reason. I don't know. My eyes can speak them, but my mouth can't. Maybe it's not the best condition right now. Anyways, thank you guys for coming, and I hope that you guys are some level sleepy because of me speaking in this kind of voice. I hope you guys sleep well, have a nice dream. And if you're not interested with the book, it's fine. But if you do, you can find the public version on the internet, I believe, because it has been published so many years that it should be okay to read the public version on the internet. So, this is Pride and Prejudice. This is Pride and Prejudice. 5 chapters for today. 你真的睡着了，刚醒，眼睛睁不开。谢谢你告诉我这件事情。结果你都在看儿科，只听了一下。那我相信你的儿科一定可以考得很好。はい。じゃあ、そろそろお休みの時間だよね。梦到变成最闪耀的哥布林。OK， 如果这个梦对你来说是一个不错的梦的话，那我祝你梦到。OK， 那我跟你们说晚安。桑米晚安 ，Kido 晚安，阿佩晚安 ，Wendy 晚安，考试加油。徐荣晚安，伟哥晚安，多宇晚安，金52赫兹晚安。Kido 晚安，豆干晚安，西瓜晚安，小薇薇晚安，海海晚安，Sunny 晚安，普鲁里晚安，西月晚安，秋生晚安，茶茶晚安，优薇晚安，星辰晚安，EWOP 晚安。嗨，じゃあ，如果你真的还不困，或是你还有别的事情要做，需要有人陪伴你的话呢，我会把你丢到别人那边。那要去的话，记得要礼貌。那其他人，我希望你们多多少少有点睡意，可以原地就寝了。谢谢你们来。那我们去哪里呢？Let me see。感觉大家都在做比较激烈的活动，可能不太适合。那我们今天原地就寝好了，好不好？今天原地就寝。读书不能有睡意，但谢谢你。所以晚安。好。那，怕打扰大家的睡眠情绪，我们今天原地解散。じゃあ、みんな、礼拜6晚上见。拜拜。